Look out of an aeroplane window on your next flight. It has rounded corners. Every window on every airliner in the world has rounded corners. It is one of those design details that is so consistent and so quiet that you have probably never once wondered why. The answer is that in 1954, aircraft had square windows, and two of them came apart in mid-air. And the people who worked out why did something that has almost no equal in engineering history. And the most repeated version of this story, the one you may already know, is wrong in a specific and interesting way. Start with what the Comet was. The Havilland Comet was the first jet airliner in the world. Not the first fast plane, the first passenger jet. It entered service in 1952, and Britain had built it, and for 2 years it was genuinely years ahead of anything the Americans had. It flew higher than propeller aircraft, which meant above the weather. It flew faster. It was smooth and quiet in a way passengers had never experienced. To fly that high, the cabin had to be pressurized much harder than anything before it. Every flight, the fuselage inflated slightly like a balloon, and on landing it deflated again. Nobody at the time fully understood what doing that thousands of times would do to aluminium. On the 10th of January 1954, a Comet registered GA Lip left Rome for London. It was climbing out over the Mediterranean when it broke apart in the air. It fell into the sea near the island of Elba. All 35 people on board were killed. 29 passengers and 6 crew. The fleet was grounded. Modifications were made. Nobody knew the real cause yet, so the changes were educated guesses. 10 weeks later, the Comets were flying again. And on the 8th of April, another Comet, flying for South African Airways from Rome to Cairo, broke apart in the air and fell into the sea. 21 people this time. 14 passengers and 7 crew. 2 aircraft, same type, same route, out of the same airport, both coming apart at altitude within 3 months. Here is where the story becomes something else. The obvious problem is that the evidence is at the bottom of the Mediterranean. You cannot investigate what you cannot hold. So the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough did 2 things at once. The first was to recover the wreckage, not some of it. The Royal Navy salvaged pieces of the first aircraft off the sea floor, and the team laid what they found out on a wooden frame shaped like the aeroplane, reassembling the fuselage from fragments. The second thing they did is the part worth remembering. They took a whole other Comet, a working one, registration GALYU, and they built an enormous water tank around it. Then they filled the tank and pumped water into the aircraft and let it out again. Over and over. Each cycle stood in for one flight's pressurization. Water, not air, because air at that pressure holds enormous energy, and a failure would have destroyed the evidence in the explosion. Water is nearly incompressible. When it fails, it simply stops. They ran it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and after the equivalent of around 3,000 flights, the fuselage failed in the tank, in a laboratory, where they could watch it happen and photograph exactly where it started. That is the whole investigation in one sentence. They could not read the accident, so they built a machine to repeat it until it happened in front of them. Now the part that most tellings get wrong. The version everybody repeats is, the windows were square, the corners concentrated stress, the corners cracked, the aeroplane came apart, and that is why windows are round now. The conclusion is right, the specific detail is not. On GALYP, the aircraft that broke up near Elba, the failure of the pressure cabin started at the forward automatic direction finder window in the roof. That is an antenna aperture covered by a fiberglass panel, not a passenger window at all. And the Court of Inquiry, reporting in February 1955, found something else that mattered as much as the shape. The panels around those openings had been attached with punch rivets rather than being glued, and that method left tiny cracks in the metal around the holes before the aircraft had flown a single mile. So the honest version is, it was not simply that the windows were square. It was that any sharp-cornered opening in a pressure vessel concentrates stress, and this aircraft had several, and the way they had been fastened had already started the cracks for you, which is why the fix generalized. Round the corners of every aperture, Everywhere, not just the ones passengers look through. A curve has no single point for stress to pile up on. It spreads the load along the arc, instead of driving it into a corner. That is why your window is a rounded rectangle, and it is why the emergency exits, the cargo doors, and the access panels are too. Look next time. Nothing on a modern fuselage has a sharp corner. The Comet 1 never carried passengers again. De Havilland lost its lead, and Boeing took the jet airliner market with the 707 and never gave it back. 3 fatal Comet crashes killed 99 people in total. But the industry got something from those investigations that it still uses every day. Before the Comet, full-scale fatigue testing of a pressurized airframe was not standard practice. After it, it was. Every airliner you have ever flown on has a sibling that was cycled to destruction in a rig on the ground, so that the one carrying you would not be the one to find the limit. That is the actual legacy, not the round corners. The round corners are just the part you can see. The industry learned to break things on purpose, carefully, in a tank, so that they would not break by accident at 30,000 feet with people inside. Next time you sit down and look out at the wing, run your finger around the edge of the window. Somebody worked that curve out the hard way, and everyone who has flown since has been riding on the